Hey, what's going on, guys? It's etaprime back here again. Today I am super excited because we're going to be taking the first look at the ONEXPLAYER from OneNetbook. Now, I've had this in my possession for the last 2 weeks. I've had some time to mess around with it, and this is an absolutely amazing little handheld gaming PC. And I use the word little lightly because this is actually a pretty big handheld PC when you take a look at the other stuff that's on the market, because what we have here is an 8.4-inch IPS display at 2560 by 1600. And as you can see, we have these built-in controls. They are non-detachable, and that's totally fine with me because they work really, really well. Now, like I mentioned, I've had this in my possession for about the last 2 weeks. I've been able to do a lot of testing with it. This is not my full review. That will be coming in the next few days. This is just kind of a first look. We're going to test out some games and some emulation. I'm also going to run some benchmarks. But here it is, the ONEXPLAYER. Now, they will be offering a few different variants. All of them will have this same layout here, but really the internals change. The one I have in my possession is powered by the Tiger Lake i7-1165 G7. They also offer one with the Tiger Lake i5-1135 G7, and they also have a top-of-the-line model with the i7-1185 G7. Prices on these will range from the i5 to the i7, anywhere from $819 up to $1,500 depending on your configuration. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at this thing. Over here on the left-hand side, as you can see, we have an analog stick and a D-pad. This is a bit of an oversized D-pad, but it does work well with fighting games. I've been testing a few. The smaller orange button closest to the D-pad will bring us back to the desktop. And if we take a look at the button closest to the analog stick over here, this is actually our select button. Moving over to the right-hand side, we have another analog stick, A, B, X, Y. Up above the A, B, and X, Y buttons, we have our start button. We also have a keyboard button. If you press it once, it'll bring the on-screen keyboard up. If you hold it for 3 seconds, it'll actually turn the built-in controller into a mouse. And right below that keyboard button, we have one labeled Turbo, and this is pretty awesome because just with the click of a button, we can turn the TDP up to 28 watts on this i7 chip, or the i5, depending on the version you get. We have 2 shoulder buttons and 2 trigger buttons, and when it comes to these trigger buttons, these are actually linear, so they're basically analog buttons. You can press them just a little bit to get a little bit of gas out of it if you're playing a racing game. You can press it a lot to floor it. And this does come in really handy if you're playing something like Forza on this thing. Taking a look at the back of the unit, we have 2 intake vents because this does have a dual fan setup to keep that i7 CPU nice and cool. We have easy to reach volume buttons over here, and we also have a mute and unmute button. Now, the power button is a small circle on the back here, but it also doubles as a fingerprint reader so you can log in very quickly to Windows 10 once you set it up. And you might have noticed we also have a built-in kickstand, which makes it really easy just to set it down if you want to watch a movie or even use a separate controller and play a game while this is on your desk. All the hot air produced by this CPU will be vented from the top out of these 2 vents here. Like I mentioned, we do have a dual fan setup in this thing. They've also added a microSD card slot, a headphone jack, a single USB 3.0 port up here, and 2 USB 4.0 Thunderbolt 4 ports, so we can add an eGPU to this unit. And stay tuned to the end of this video because I did test it out and it works amazingly with the ONEXPLAYER. Like I mentioned, they will be offering a few different variants, but we're going to go over the specs of the one that I have in my possession. For the CPU, we have that Tiger Lake i7-1165 G7, up to 28 watts. We can hit that turbo button, or you can just turn it to 28 watts from the BIOS. 4 cores, 8 threads, base clock of 2.8 GHz with a boost up to 4.7. Since we have that Tiger Lake CPU, this has built-in Iris Xe graphics, 96 execution units up to 1300 MHz. 16 gigabytes of non-user replaceable LPDDR4X Ram running at 4,267 MHz, a beautiful 8.4-inch IPS display at 2560 by 1600, and a built-in 59 watt-hour battery with 65 watt quick charging. It does come with that 65 watt charger in the box. So before we get right into testing, I wanted to show you some built-in features. Now, if you ever want to get back to the desktop real quick, just press that little orange button on the left-hand side. It doesn't close it down, so you will have to manually close it, but it brings you right back to the desktop. It'll take anything out of the way. We have that turbo button. It's on now. Just turned it off, back on. We're at 28 watts. This is how I like to run it. Now, this does have a nice touch screen built in, but you might want to use a mouse with this and not plug something in. So we have this little button over here. It'll bring up an on-screen keyboard if you hit it one time. We can close that back down, but if we hold it 3 to 5 seconds, it actually turns the built-in controller into a mouse, so we can actually navigate with a mouse cursor using that left analog stick. And to bring the on-screen keyboard back up, just hit it one more time and you're good to go. They will be offering an attachable keyboard. It kind of acts as a keyboard and a folio case to cover the screen up, but I wasn't able to get one for review just yet. We will be getting into some PC game testing, but the first thing I always like to do is run a couple benchmarks. So the first one we have here is 3D Mark Night Raid. We came in with a total score of 17,227. And, you know, I've tested a lot of these XE chips, even the 1185 G7. I've never been able to score this high in any of my tests yet. Next up, we have Fire Strike with a total score of 5,027. And finally, Time Spy coming in with a 1,752. If you're a regular viewer of the channel, you know I do a lot of AMD APU builds and reviews and tests. I've never been able to get these kind of scores out of any mobile AMD APU that I've tested on the channel so far, and I've actually even done a test on the new 5800U. And with that one, the highest score I could squeeze out of it was 1,517 in Time Spy. So for having integrated Intel graphics, the ONEXPLAYER is looking pretty good, but those are benchmarks. Now it's time to move over to some real-world performance. First up, we have Forza Horizon 4, but before we get into some gameplay, I just wanted to show you these analog triggers here. They actually work really well. I'm really used to using the Xbox One controller, and these have a little more throw to them, so it actually makes it a little easier to control that throttle, and it's really helpful in racing games. Next up, we have GTA 5 900p, textures on high and everything else on normal. It looks really good like this, and we got an average of 71 FPS out of it. Here we have Street Fighter V 1080p, 85% resolution scale, and a mix of medium and low settings. It runs really well on this unit. Every once in a while when there's lots of effects on screen, I do see it dip down to around 58, but if you wanted to lower a few more of these settings or even take that resolution down to 900p, it would run at 60 all day, no problem. CSGO 1080p, high medium mix, we got an average of 112 FPS out of this one. Skyrim Special Edition 1080p medium settings. It's holding really steady at 60. Now every once in a while I do see it dip down to around 59, but if I didn't have that frame counter on, I'd never notice it. Overwatch 1080p 100% resolution scale with a mix of medium and low settings. We got an average of 81 FPS. Cyberpunk 2077, you know how hard this game can be to run, so right now we're at 720p, low settings at 80% resolution scale, and we're getting an average of 32 FPS. It's not great by any means, but this is just a newer game and it's super hard to run on these integrated graphics. I will have a full emulation video coming up soon, but I just kind of wanted to show this off. We have PS3 using RPCS3, Skate 3 running at 60 FPS. This is a very CPU intensive game here, and it's running great. So in my opinion, I think this thing does a great job in handheld mode. On-the-go gaming is really great here. Now, you do have to drop some of the settings down, but the great thing about this is it does have Thunderbolt 4 built in. So on-the-go gaming, you're going to use it in handheld mode. When you get back to the house, you can plug in your eGPU and up that GPU performance. This is a 2080 Ti, and we're going to test out Doom Eternal. And here it is. We're now running Doom Eternal at 1440p, ultra settings, and we're getting an average of 95 FPS. So this is turning out to be a really awesome little handheld gaming PC, and it does an amazing job at emulation. Like I mentioned, I will have a full emulation video coming up, and I will have some more PC gaming in the future, so keep an eye on the channel. IPS 8.4 inches, it does get pretty bright. It's got a little bit of a glare to it when you got a light right on it, but overall, if you hold it at the right angle, it's perfectly fine. Built-in controls are great. I wasn't sure about that oversized D-pad until I started using it. It actually works out really nice because the way you have to hold this thing. But there is one complaint that I have, and I'd love to see this fixed before it officially releases, and that's the built-in sound. To me, it doesn't get as loud, and I understand that this is a handheld console. There's really no bass to this thing, and I can overlook that, but when it comes to the sound itself, I would love to see it get a bit louder and not distort. I mean, at full volume, the way it sits right now, it doesn't distort, but it's just not loud enough for me. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I really appreciate you watching. My full review video will be coming up soon. I'll also have an emulation video and some more PC game testing. So if there's anything you want to see running on the ONEXPLAYER, let me know in the comments below. If you're interested in learning more about this, I will leave a few links in the description. They are launching an Indiegogo. But that's it for this one. And like always, thanks for watching.